Good Monday morning, loved ones. This is Monday, May 18th, 2020, and this is your morning pastor chat. If you're wondering why I can roll through that beginning so quickly, it's because this is take number 18, I think. But I think I'm just going to use this one no matter how it turns out. And so if there's mistakes in it, oh well. Actually, there's always mistakes in it. And at some point I just have to decide this is the take that we're going to use. Anyway, you've just entered into my thought process for a little bit. There's something on my head. What in the world is this? It's got big ears. Oh well. Did you know we've been doing these pastor chats for 2 months? January, February, March. March 18th was the first morning pastor chat. 2 months later, May 18th, we are entering this week, and we believe that this is our final week meeting remotely. We're going to meet in person on Sunday, so if you're comfortable with meeting in person, please join us. If you're not quite uncomfortable yet, don't feel any pressure. In fact, if you are if you are compromised in some way, or you just are at a high risk, you need to make that decision. We don't want to make that decision for you. So you are loved and cared for. Well, we've been talking about difficult texts in God's Word, and I want to talk to you about a text in Matthew chapter 18. Once again, it came up in a previous pastor chat, and I wanted to revisit it and talk a little bit more about it. But the verse in question actually is Matthew 18:18. So let's look at what it says. Matthew chapter 18, verse 18, it says, "Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." That seems like a pretty powerful statement there. And it goes on, verse 19, it's also another verse we should be looking at carefully. "Again I say to you, if two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven." Wow. That seems like a license to have some significant power. In fact, some have used these verses to kind of grow their power, grow their authority, if you will, or to bolster it in a way that is really not what this passage is talking about at all. The first question that any student of the Word should be asking is, what is the context? What is the literal context of this verse? Well, let's read it very quickly here. Matthew 18, verse 15, starting in verse 15, says this, "If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again I say to you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them." Wow. These are pretty strong words, but notice what we're talking about. We're talking about sin. We're talking about when someone commits a sin or a grievance against someone. When that happens, there's a certain process for which you are called, I am called, to act. And quite actually, this is spoken to a specific group of people, the disciples. They're gathered there, and Jesus is saying, you have this authority to do this. Now, why is it so revolutionary? Is it revolutionary because he's saying, you can do anything you want. You have that kind of authority. You can even bind Satan. You can go and commit battle against the demons themselves, because whatever you ask, my Father is bound to do it now. Is that what he's saying? Is that what he's getting at? Or is he getting at something much more personal? Well, he's talking about when someone sins against you. He's not talking about demon possession. He's talking about sin. Now, some of you will link demon possession and sin, but here he's being very practical. If you have a grievance against a brother, confront that brother privately. If they won't turn from their way, bring someone with you, a witness, 2 or 3 with you, so that this can be established in the presence of 2 or 3 witnesses. And those witnesses then, at the end of this, are said to have some kind of authority. Now, why is that significant? Well, in Second Temple Judaism, that's the Judaism that occurred after the Jews were led out of captivity from Babylon and Assyria, well, the Babylonian captivity specifically, and they built the temple again, and all the way up until 70 AD, that is when the temple was destroyed once again in Jerusalem. That's Second Temple Judaism. During Second Temple Judaism, there was a council who had all authority. Any authority was vested in the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, that was a group of about 70 religious elite, religious leaders. It was made up of priests and rabbis and wealthy people. It really made, I think it made Jesus upset, actually, because they believed they had all authority. And it started with the high priest, and it trickled down into this group of overlords who were able to decide who was guilty, who was innocent, who should be bound, who should be loosed, who should be killed, who should not be killed. You remember it was the Sanhedrin who condemned Jesus to die. They had condemned him as if they had the authority in heaven and on earth to do such things. What Jesus is talking about here is in direct contrast to the way things were set up in the first century. The Sanhedrin thought that they had authority. They may have had a surface level authority in front of men's eyes, but Jesus here is saying, hey, even if just 2 or 3 gathered in my name agree about something, they have the kind of authority that the Sanhedrin dreams of. In fact, the authority that is had by somebody in that situation goes up to heaven. It's deeper, it's more profound than the earthly authority that they're seeking to have. This also goes back to Matthew 16 when he says a similar statement to Peter and the disciples in verse 19. Peter is standing there and Jesus says this to him and his disciples, and Jesus' disciples. I tell you, verse 19, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. That's in contrast to the Sanhedrin. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. That's to say, you no longer need to go to the Sanhedrin to talk things out. You no longer need to go to the religious authorities to figure out a quarrel between you and your neighbor. You've been given the authority. I'm actually, me, the one who has all authority in heaven and on earth. I am giving you the authority to work this out between you two. Because it's not vested in a council any longer. It's vested in those who are gathered in my name. It's revolutionary. It's unbelievable. All authority that the council thought they have is now found among the church. The people, the everyday follower of Jesus Christ, has the same authority that the council had. And what he's saying is, you may decide that your brother has sinned against you. If that happens, you may not see them be bound here on earth. They may not go to jail, for example. But take heart, this is a spiritual matter. It will be taken care of by my Father in heaven. It's remarkable. It's beautiful. The revolutionary idea is not that they would be out binding demons and things like that. The revolutionary idea is now the authority is in the people. The people of the Church of Jesus Christ have the authority to decide things themselves. They don't need to go to their, quote, religious leaders, the council, the Sanhedrin. You don't need to make a sacrifice and go lay your case before them so that they can decide in their upper echelons of authority. No, the authority is found even with 2 or 3 gathered. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. In other words, my Father is listening to you. Thanks be to God, we are loved by a great and awesome God. Go to him directly.